April 20th, Brainerd Charter Commission meeting to order. Are we doing roll here? I forgot. Yeah.
Yes.
Call to order, I guess. We do a roll call with Jennifer?
Bevins. Burton. Chesak.
Yes.
Lambert.
Here.
O'Day. Shipe.
Here.
Yeager.
Yes.
You have a quorum.
Yes. Now, did I miss somebody? I counted 4.
Yeah, we have just 4.
Including
Kevin's
you.
teasing you.
Including you.
Thank you. We have the agenda to approve.
Motion to approve, Yeager.
Motion by Yeager to approve. Is there a second?
Lambert, second.
Second by Lambert. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Have an agenda. We have the minutes from the, what is that, November?
November 10th.
Yeah.
I'll move to accept. Lambert?
Second, Shape.
Motion to accept them or approve them, and
Yeah.
by Lambert, second by Shipe. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I will be abstaining. I wasn't here. All those in favor?
Aye.
I abstain. Motion carries. New business.
Mr. President, let the record show that Mr. Bevins has just entered.
Hello, Kelly. You're just in time.
Hi, Mr. Chair.
We got through everything you don't like to go through. We have discussion of chapter 1. Oh, I'm sorry. This, the first item under our business here is the charter language. That would be the, I think we should focus on the actual wording of that. Reason we're here is the, would you mind reading that motion by the council, Jennifer?
No, not at all, Mr. President. If I could give a little background?
Sure.
Okay, thanks. So the city council did approve the agreements for the charter commission, or the charter contributions for the 1.5% of last year's, previous year's taxable value for both the Brainerd Community Action for events and community action programs, as well as for the center for the senior center organization. However, the council did have some questions in regard to the contribution for Arboretum or green space. As you recall, the city did do requests for proposals for all 3 groups under those charter contributions. We received 1 response to our RFP for Arboretum or green space organizations. The council discussed whether the Northland Arboretum would qualify for funding, since approximately 260 of the 420 acres are actually located outside of the city limits of the city of Brainerd, including the visitor center. I did attach some maps in your packet for your reference. Also, that the ARB in their proposal was requesting funding for operations, and that the operations of the ARB are done at the visitor center, which is also located outside of city limits. Therefore, the council did not approve the funding for the Northland Arboretum, but instead asked the Charter Commission to clarify the intent of within the city limits of the city of Brainerd. Chair Chesak asked me to share with you what the actual motion was that came from the council. And the motion was to send to the Charter Commission to clarify the language change instituted that said there shall be a green space or arboretum within the city limits. In addition, the Northland Arboretum did send a letter to the members of the Charter Commission, as well as the council and the mayor, and I have attached that to your packet as well. So, Mr. Chair, that's the background on this item.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any comments on this particular item? I guess we're tasked with one thing, to identify our intentions, the way I see it, of that language.
Mr. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And Mr. Chair, just to let you know that Commissioner O'Day is not able to be here today. He's on vacation. However, he did send me an email with his thoughts on this that I'd be happy to share and get into the record after other comments.
Why don't we just start out with that?
Yeah, let's start with that one. Yep.
You don't mind?
Not at all. Again, this is from Commissioner O'Day. Fellow members of the Charter Commission, I apologize for my absence. I want to give you all my thoughts on how to answer the question from the Council's Personnel and Finance Committee of what we meant by within the city limits of Brainerd. In the discussions regarding how to specifically reword the language regarding the half-mill levy for what we had already decided to call, quote, an arboretum or green space, unquote, I recall suggesting that we add in the language, quote, within the city limits of Brainerd, unquote. My reasoning for this is that we have an overabundance of existing green space already in our city that needs attention, and it is irresponsible for any city government to tax its citizens to pay for any type of project that is, excuse me, one, not geographically located within its own well-defined boundaries, and two, located within another city. The Northland Arboretum has penned a letter to the council suggesting that they are and always have been partially in Baxter. That claim would deem any use of funds toward the Northland Arboretum for this discussion a direct violation of the city charter. These funds cannot and should never fund any type of programs, building improvements, or maintenance that is not within our city limits. I do not know of any buildings or improvements that the Northland Arboretum currently has that are in Brainerd. They have built their main entry, signage, event center, parking lots, gazebo gardens, trails, etc., all within the city limits of Baxter. Understand that this means that we have taxed Brainerd citizens to pay for buildings and parking lots in the city of Baxter. Does the state of Minnesota provide funding for Wisconsin state parks? Does Baxter provide funding for Brainerd city parks? Then why does Brainerd provide funding for another city? Are we bursting at the seams with funds and can't find anywhere in town to spend money? No. In order to fund the Arboretum and not be a direct violation of the city charter, the Northland Arboretum could theoretically have two options. One, go through the lengthy process of annexing its entirety into the city limits of Brainerd, or two, somehow prove that each and every cent from this levy is being spent on its unimproved and unused property that lies within the city limits of Brainerd. I am not sure that the first option is even in the best interest of the city of Brainerd or Baxter, and I don't think the second option is even possible. I am a fan of the Northland Arboretum, and I appreciate everything they have done to offer citizens of Baxter and the entire area. I am simply not in favor of spending tax dollars taken from the city of Brainerd on projects that are clearly in Baxter or any other city for that matter. Our charter supports my thoughts. Please recommend to the Personnel and Finance Committee that funding the Arboretum would directly violate the Brainerd City Charter. Thank you, Mike O'Day.
Thank you for reading that, Jennifer. So I guess at this point, we're asked by the city council what our intentions were with the language we submitted to them, which they approved. Does anybody want to expand on that?
Well, Mr. Chair, I happen to agree with what Commissioner O'Day says. I think we should only be responsible for what's within our city limits. So I consider the city limits within our boundaries.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Scheit?
I'm kind of two minds about this. Reading their letter, I do see that they provide a lot of benefits to the citizens of Brainerd, and I think that is valuable. Things that we don't necessarily have space for in our city. Some of the trails, running the cross-country ski meet, things like that. We don't have a park where that would be possible in the same way. So I really appreciate that, but it does, looking at their budget, I'm a little confused that Brainerd is contributing a quarter of their operating budget, and it's mostly going to land in Baxter. That does feel wrong, and I agree with Commissioner O'Day on that. So I'm a little torn, I guess, is where I am right now.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Lambert again. May I just make, or do you guys want to go first before I make another comment? I guess I read the letter too about the amount, that Brainerd citizens use it. But this is a public entity. It's used for everybody, and I don't think it should be tied into who's used it and who doesn't use it. So I guess I don't think that's a valid argument for us to continue to pay.
Again, what was our intent by the language?
Right.
It says in the city limits of, so. Anybody else?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, please.
Mr. Yeager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to just weigh in just quickly on the intent here. So I've been a part of both the conversations at the charter level as well as a lot of the conversations at the city council level. And I guess the point that I want to make is that when we began to approach the subject of these entities with rewriting the charter, the intent, as far as from my chair, was that we would like to see the removal of language that puts the city in a position where they have to give a set amount of funds to a predetermined entity with virtually no control, no audit control, virtually no control. So when I'm thinking about the word intent here, I believe that that was one of the big drivers of the intent, was to allow the city council to ultimately have the control to say, we think that maybe potentially not only these parties, but there may be other parties out there who should have the opportunity to get their hands on this money that comes from the taxpayers. And that's where the intent of the language change from arboretum to green space, from center to senior center, that's how that all started. So I want to say that I think that on the intent side, that's where I was coming from in the language of changing to green space. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing on the intent was, and this played out during a city council meeting, it was not my intent to say that only one entity could receive this money. It was my intent or my belief that what we were sending to the city council was the ability to say, hey, look, we took applications from not just one entity, but three. We're going to take this money and we're going to divide it between two, give this many and that many. That was my personal intent, was to give city council control ultimo on that money, how much and where it went. So that's another little wrinkle to this intent story. I know there's the legal language that kind of, got into the minutia of who could get this money and who couldn't. That's the second part. Third part, I'm finally getting to the punchline here, is that I fully agree with the mindset that says that Brainerd taxpayer money should be used exclusively on Brainerd property entities. Okay, so there's a tremendous value in, for instance, the bike trails at Cuyuna, but I don't think that it's responsible for us to say that the city of Brainerd taxpayers should be a contributor in that because we use those. And you could multiply that times a billion different things that the city of Brainerd uses. Now, is the Arboretum a wonderful entity? Do they do great work? Absolutely. That to me is not in question here. What is in question here is whether it is appropriate to take taxpayer money from the taxpayers of Brainerd and put it into an entity that is partially or even substantially not in Brainerd city limits. I can wrap my head around how that is not right. So that's where I am on, I hope I'm making myself clear on where I am on those 3 points of intent with this. I don't know what that means for rewriting the language and what that process is, but I can say that it was my intent to give city council ultimate control on where this money goes and how the people who get it get it. That's all.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes.
We do have representatives here also from the Arboretum.
I'm a little hesitant in the sense that our agenda item is focused on what is our intent. They're asking us for what our intent was. I'm not sure if anybody from the Arboretum can explain what our intent was. So I'm hesitant to have others chime in, because I think only us here knew what our intent was. Mr. Bevins?
As a non-voting member of this commission, I have nothing to add.
Okay, fair enough.
Whose comments on this entire process are a matter of public record.
And I appreciate that in the sense that you have, did you vote to, just curious, did you vote to have this sent back to us?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I'm of the position, much of it as same as everyone else, that my intention at the time of approving this language to go to the council was an entity within the city limits of Brainerd. And so if we need to send that back, if anybody has any desire to do anything else, I guess this would be the time. However, I'm not sure what that would be. other than to change the language in the charter. I mean, I can't think of anything else that would be appropriate to go back to the city council, other than to explain our intent. I would, I guess, at this point, I think a motion in order to explain to the council if we approve this or not, what our, somebody explain in a motion what our intention was, perhaps might be appropriate. Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I think Kevin had a very good handle on it, if he would mind doing that.
Crafting a motion?
Yes.
Thank you. I have a question for staff.
Yep.
The discussion that we just had, is the intent clear? Or in your mind, Jennifer, Ms. Bergman, sorry, is it still ambiguous with what the general, there seems to be a consensus here. What I'm asking is does the consensus seem to ring true with what the intent is or what we were asked here?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Yeager, this is what I am hearing from the commission, that the intent from the Charter Commission was that the organization would be within the city limits of the city of Brainerd. And I think what I am hearing you say is that while there are a third to a half of the Arboretum's property is in Brainerd, the majority of the Arboretum lies outside of the city limits of the city of Brainerd, which includes their building where operations happen, and that the majority of what happens at the Arb is not within the city limits of Brainerd. I think that's what I'm hearing you say. Therefore, you would not consider the Northland Arboretum to be within the city limits of the city of Brainerd.
I would just say that's language we sent to the council for them to make that decision.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
So I took some liberties a little bit with that discussion. And if I am incorrect, please correct me.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just as a point of discussion, and I'm not prepared to make a motion yet, but as a point of discussion, this leads us to a place where, okay, what qualifies as a city, what it qualifies as a city of Brainerd entity? If they operate outside city limits, but their address, their mailing address is in Brainerd, does that qualify? If the senior center owned, I'm just drawing hypotheticals here, if they had two entities, if they had two buildings, one was located in Brainerd and one was located in Crosby or wherever, how do we navigate that? So I guess what I'm struggling with here is the language of what qualifies any entity to be within city limits.
Okay, I would just argue that our task is to give the council what our intent was. That's what they asked us to do when we provided them the language that they approved. So all this other items are they're not necessarily germane to our item we're tasked with. And I'm not saying it's not relevant, but it's not something we are in a position to discuss based on the item we have in front of us. So, I mean, we could go on all night about what all those other things are, but our task is to give back to the council what our intention of that language is. We've all opined on that. So,
Mr. Chair?
yes, Lambert.
Again, I think within the city limits of Brainerd, Brainerd has, the boundaries, Baxter's has the boundaries. So I think it's very clear that within the limits of Brainerd are within our, you guys help me, our area, there's boundaries. I mean, we're at a boundary that we should be able to say, this is the city and this is not the city.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair, real quick. Yeah, what's absolutely playing out is we're taking taxpayer Brainerd money, using it for improvements within the city of Baxter. That is what's actually playing out here. I do not believe that was the intent. So with that, I will make a motion that we send back to the city council that our intent with the wording of within city limits means that the money spent or the money taken from what was the mill should be spent on property or on resources located fully within city limits of Brainerd.
We have a motion by Mr. Yeager.
Lambert will second.
Second, any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Okay. Number 4, I'm sorry, the second item here, 1 second, is,
Hey, Mr. Chair.
yes,
Kelly
Mr.
here.
Bevins.
I don't know if this needs to be another agenda item, but Commissioner Yeager brought up the portioning of the taxpayers' dollars. And I was also under the same impression that Mr. Yeager was, and I was the one who checked with the attorney, and it was regarding the senior center, not the green space money. But he was very clear that it is an all or nothing. And I really think this commission should look at that, because I don't think that was ever the intent of anybody here. I don't know that it was, and if that needs to be
That's certainly,
parsed or explained or something, maybe now's the time, maybe it needs to come back to a different, before we move off of this, since, being a non-voting member, it doesn't really matter, but
if you could make a motion, I bet you would right now, right?
if I made a motion, it would have been to adjourn an hour ago. But I can't, so, because this is easy. But we might want to look at that one and just have the attorney say, is there a way on all of these to apportion the,
Well, the actual wording got us in trouble because it says A.
I know.
A, right,
Well,
okay.
that seems to me that would be pretty simple to
Yes,
fix.
it would.
If that would be a motion from the council to send that back to legal.
Or us.
Well, that's right, maybe we should confirm that that's what us wants to do, all of the voting members.
Yeah, there's people here that could make a motion like
There
that if they
is.
so wanted to.
I know, we could be here till midnight.
I understand that. But we got a
Yep, I was just
planning and
writing-
zoning meeting here is coming up at 6.
It's going to be short. You can put that, push them back a little.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Miss Jennifer, Miss Bergman.
And if I may, this is certainly something at the direction of the Charter Commission, if you would like staff to bring back to your May Charter Commission meeting for discussion or potentially a recommendation to the council to clarify that language. I'd be happy to do that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Scheib?
I would move to direct staff to review the 3 sections that send money to green spaces, senior centers, and community organizations to reflect that one or more organizations may receive funds and enter into contracts with the city to receive those funds.
Okay, you're asking for staff to come back with that?
Yes, to propose changes to the charter that allow multiple organizations to receive that money.
We have a motion by Mr. Scheib. Second?
I'll second it.
Second by Lambert. Is there any further discussion?
One quick, and I'm not asking you to amend the motion, but I feel like, what if we don't want to give all of the money to one organization? This is another little wrinkle in this, in the writing that to me is a bit problematic. So hypothetically, somebody could come, and be the only person who proposed the RFP, but they only need or want $10,000, and we have $150,000. I would like to add, or at least offer the question of, should legal look at what we would do with the money if we didn't give all of it away? And I'm not necessarily asking you to amend your motion, but
Well, I would say, being that you asked, I think we have an answer already, do we not, Jennifer? If I recall, there was a email from Attorney Lingle.
Clarification as to whether or not it is to an organization? Is that what you're referring to?
No,
Mr. Chair?
if we what we do if there's not money given out, I think. But it does say, it does imply the entirety of the money goes to an organization. And so if we were to do something like Mr. Yeager's suggesting, it would be apportion the money to different organizations instead of just one, if there was more than one. So that would be a language change we would need as well.
That would be, Mr. Chair, I think what I'm referring to, or what you're referring to, is clarification on whether or not the city has to
Right.
provide funding to an organization. According to Attorney Langle, the charter language says that the city has to levy for that amount.
Right.
But if there is not an organization that has stepped up that can use that money, the city does not have to appropriate those funds at that time. However, those funds must always be set aside for that particular,
Use.
thank you, purpose, use.
So, sorry, yeah, Mr. Chair, and I think this was part of the language rewriting. Our charter before said we had to give money to the Arboretum.
Right.
What if the Arboretum dissolves? What if the Arboretum fails to exist, right? What do we do with the money, right?
Give it to Lakes Area Media.
No, we give it to the Brainerd Parks, obviously, but that's the point of the rewriting of this, I believe, is just to unravel this mystery of being forced to take money and being forced to give it to an entity carte blanche, whether they exist or not. That's, I think, the intent of rewriting this section from my chair was, guys.
So we have a motion and a second, and it has to do with having staff come back with, I believe that was to, if you want to repeat that, Mr. Shipe.
Oh, no. Certainly. Direct staff to review the language of the charter to allow distributing these levied funds to one or more organizations.
Okay. Any other second by Lambert?
Yeah, I do. And may I ask, Andrew, if we could also add that if there is only one entity that applies, the amount would be only what they need versus giving the whole amount. Does that make sense?
That's an amendment? Are you willing?
I'm asking if you would consider that.
Yes, I guess what Ms. Bergman said sounded like that's already possible.
Is,
You
okay.
don't need that amendment.
So,
Okay, then I don't.
yeah, I totally agree.
Okay,
We just-
okay, then I approve, yes, I continue to second.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks. We're at the discussion of the name, Chapter 1, name boundaries. This has to do with our wards and precincts in our city charter. And Jennifer, you want to start us out on this?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I gave you a lot of background information in your memo, but I can be brief in summarizing it. Following the decennial census, the city, all voting districts must be examined to ensure that there's equal population distributed for all federal, state, and county offices, as well as municipalities that elect their representatives by district, which Brainerd does. So this process is known as redistricting. We took a look at all 4 of our wards to see if any of the population deviated by more than 10%. It didn't. Therefore, the city of Brainerd did not have to redistrict. But in anticipation of doing that, we started looking at the charter to see what we were going to need to do should we need to redistrict. And what we found was that the language that's in there that identifies the boundaries of each ward were actually incorrect. That language was never amended after the decennial census in 2010. So we knew already that there needed to be a change to the charter. If nothing else, those boundaries needed to be changed. But as we talked about it with Attorney Langle, the recommendation that staff has is that instead of replacing those boundaries, which is quite a few lines of boundaries. Instead of doing that, that we just be more vague and say that the city shall be divided into 4 wards in accordance with state law. Therefore, every 10 years, the council will do that by resolution, should it be needed, and that is pretty well laid out in state statute. Connie, did I miss anything?
No, I think I would just like to add too that during this process as set out by statute, there's ways that it has to go. The state has to do their boundaries first, then the city does their boundaries, and then the county has to do their boundaries. And often it gets referred to the court system rather than the legislature doing the boundaries, and so it gets a very compressed schedule for cities and counties. And so by taking the language out of the charter as well, we could amend it with the resolution, which requires 1 reading and 1 presentation, rather than an ordinance, which takes about a month or so.
Everybody understand this? We had a recommendation from, I believe Jennifer, in your memo, you recommended just 4 words. Have it in there amended to say 4 words, take everything else out, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, did everybody get a chance to read that? Okay. Does anybody disagree with that idea?
I do not, and I will make a motion to accept the recommendation on the rewording as written, or as presented.
Motion by Mr. Yeager. We have a second.
Lambert will second.
Second by Lambert. Is there any further discussion on this?
I said
Yep,
one item,
Mr.
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Not that I love the verbal description of a map in 5 or 6 paragraphs here. I do like the idea that the charter kind of defines where someone could understand could understand the layout of the wards. And so perhaps a reference to a map is available at City Hall might kind of help a layperson understand, how do I find what ward I'm in? Or, I don't know. It seems like that was the intent of laying all this description out originally, was where's Ward 1, where's Ward 2? And with this abbreviated section, right, it just says, yep, there's 4 words, figure it out yourself. And so maybe just kind of a little bit more clarity about where someone could find that.
Mr. Chair, I believe there is a ward map on our map page, is that not?
There is, but I appreciate what you're saying, Commissioner, that something in the charter, if somebody were reading the charter, they would know that a map does exist.
I will amend my motion to include the language, refer to the current ward map,
City of Brainerd.
yes, for the city of Brainerd.
And I'm okay with that.
Okay, so that would just be included on with the original then?
There you got it.
So, well, I guess we have to technically vote on the amendment, I think, unless it's friendly. Do we have to? Yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah, sure.
We have a motion then? Well, now, we don't have to do that. Let's just vote it up or down. We got any more discussion on this? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of the amended language as Mr. Yeager presented, which was agreed upon by Seconder Lambert? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have a new item going back to the council.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. Then staff will draft a ordinance to go before the city council for their consideration.
Thank you very much. And then we have another item here is about streets, and there was quite a bit of information in our packet, and I thought it was very, very straightforward and explained a lot, what we need and don't need. I hope everybody had a chance to read that, or else we'd be here all night.
I brought my pillow.
Ms. Bergman, would you care to start us out on this?
Actually, Mr. Sandy, our city engineer, public works director, will do that.
Paul, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jennifer had me and the city attorney run through this section, Chapter 5 of the State of the City Charter related to streets. The odd part about this section is really nothing in this section contains street language. It mostly has to do with sidewalks. So you want me to go through section by section? You guys can discuss that, or do you want me to go through the whole thing? Up to you guys.
I've already heard the whole thing, couple of times. Does anybody need Mr. Sandy to go over through any specific section? Anything you want to hear, or you want to hear the whole thing? I'll leave it up to the rest of the commission. I'm good without hearing anything. If you want to, so.
I concur, I'm good. I'm also good without here. I have no objections. I'm good with continuing on, but,
I am also.
Same.
Lambert.
Mr. Shipe, are you okay with?
Oh, yes. Yep.
Okay. So we're looking for language change in the charter, then a lot of deletions, that would require a motion again.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just
Yeah.
to highlight, the biggest change in this section would be the onus of repairing sidewalks, removing that from adjacent properties to the maintenance the maintenance of the city. And that by deleting this section, that is what occurs, is that becomes a city responsibility to maintain its sidewalks as it does its streets as a transportation system. So that is really, all the other stuff is really old language, street sweeping districts, all that stuff. That's like, kind of common sense to get rid of that. But that is like a big portion of this is really related to how we used to enforce sidewalk repairs will now be on the onus of the city.
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, Paul, that includes all our trails too that go through the city.
Trails were always that way, maintained by the city. Sidewalks were treated as, the portions adjacent to that property were the responsibility of the adjacent owner. Now, that won't change for snow removal. That is in city code to remove snow, ice, and things. But when it comes to trippers, ADA issues, and things like that, that would become a city responsibility if this change is made.
Paul, would you say the vast majority of those trippers and sidewalk damage, I shouldn't say that, but is it a lot of times trees, the roots?
Yeah, it could be trees, it's freeze thaw. Those two items together wreak havoc, but trees are a big problem. We have a lot of very, old trees in the city that have large root systems that do heave and push up sidewalks. So that is the case, but freeze thaw does wreak havoc also.
Like some of the maples over there in the northeast, I mean, they're huge, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I trip on them all the time. But when you have a continuous lifting or separation, which occurs, is there come a point where you say, I know you have the way to pressure lift and reset, is that correct?
Correct, yeah, you can, there's ways to put foam under sidewalks to lift up segments, but the easiest way generally is to just tear it out and replace it, because there's not many contractors that do that, and for the amount of sidewalks that may need that, it might not warrant someone coming in and doing it, so.
So at what point do you say, okay, let's take some of the root as well then? Does that happen?
We generally don't want to take root because it'll kill trees. Now, there are some, there's ways you can, when you're during construction projects, you can cut roots properly to place sidewalks and things, and we do it all the time.
Okay.
Take the chance of hopefully not killing the tree, but there actually are other ways of like shaving down the tripper in areas.
Yep.
There are companies that do that, and we have actually had contractors come in and give us quotes to do like whole areas of town. We had them come and survey North Brainerd and look at, okay, what would it cost to shave all the trippers in North Brainerd? That's the kind of improvements I'm thinking that the city will pursue.
Okay.
Instead of full replacement of panels and things, we'll have someone like Precision Concrete Cutting come in, and they'll shave off trippers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just real quick question, Mr. Sandy. Because this language was crafted largely, I'm assuming by Mr. Langle, would it be fair to say that he also was looking at the liability that would then swing to the city on these sidewalks? I don't know, I guess I'm a little fuzzy on if somebody trips on a sidewalk and maintaining that tripper is the homeowner versus now becoming the city. I'm just curious on the pendulum swing of liability and how much money we're talking here.
The liability is always there for the city. It's
Okay.
in the city right of way. It doesn't matter if we put the onus on a property owner. If the city didn't pursue that property owner in repairing that sidewalk, continuously, that the liability is always going to be on the city. It doesn't matter if that we divert that to the property owner or not.
Understood. And roughly, is there a big money swing that will happen with this?
No, I think this will be kind of one of our standard maintenance type projects where we include it in our capital improvement fund. We go out, we spend maybe 25,000 a year in doing concrete shaving, replacement panels, ADA upgrades, we could call it, and we work on it over time. You know, this isn't gonna be an overnight thing. We have 40 miles of sidewalks, I think, in the city. And so it is a lot of infrastructure to take care of. But, you know, the point being is that, you know, we look at sidewalks and a lot differently, I think, nowadays as a part of the transportation system. You know, back then, streets were the transportation system. And, you know, now we look at the whole transportation system as right-of-way line to right-of-way line, and whatever's within that is the transportation system. And so we should consider it all a city responsibility.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Sandy.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Scheit.
I have a couple questions for Mr. Sandy. So this kind of gets at, and I think it's a city policy that we want people to report issues and then the city fixes them. But you mentioned you had an assessment of, right, all the trippers in the neighborhood. Is that something the city regularly does?
So the city by law is required to have an ADA transition plan, and that is, that was set out, I think, in 1992 when ADA really became a thing. And what we did as part of that plan is we did a survey with our temporary workers. They went out and they walked every segment of sidewalk. They looked at trippers over a half an inch in difference. They looked at pedestrian ramps. So we have 760, however many pedestrian ramps in Brainerd. We looked at compliance. So there's multiple slope requirements. There's truncated domes, the little bumps you see that you walk across. So there's all kinds of ADA compliance, and that's all part of that plan. And so as part of that plan, it basically says that the city will upgrade non-compliant ADA issues as part of capital improvement projects. It doesn't say that we have to have a specific plan in place, like a 5-year plan. It just says that you need to have something in place that identifies when you'll be upgrading your sidewalks to be ADA compliant. And if we say that it is if we do a street project and we're upgrading all the sidewalks adjacent to that street to meet ADA, that's good enough for the point of an ADA transition plan, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, I guess what I'm worried about with this language is if someone has a deteriorating sidewalk in front of their house, their rental property, I don't know that they would know, oh, I have to call the city to get this fixed. Right, that's a bit of a leap. So I would be interested in having some proactive, I don't think you hire temps to walk the 740 miles every year, but having some kind of proactive analysis.
And I could foresee it as kind of a step-by-step process, you know, like our capital improvement plan, we kind of focus on districts in Brainerd, you know, each year we're doing, for example, North Brainerd, and 1 year we'll be down in Northeast. So I can foresee kind of the same thing. We had a contractor actually come in for free and inventory all of our sidewalks and look for those non-compliant issues. And so I think that in itself, we'll be able to jump around and kind of do it the same way as how we do that. So.
Cool. Second question. I know living in North Brainerd, there's some odd sidewalk terminations. We have half a block of a sidewalk and then nothing. As street projects happen, is there any kind of logic or process around, okay, we should complete the sidewalk, or building a new road, we should have standard sidewalks on it?
So I think to answer your first question, so a good example that I'll bring up is the North Brainerd project we currently worked on. We had a public meeting, had a few residents, one of those sidewalk segments that ends halfway. Just had the conversation, okay, does it make sense to continue this down the street, but being there's a sidewalk on the other side, do we just remove that, piece of sidewalk? The consensus was from both the property owners along that segment and city staff was, let's just remove it. It doesn't, why we have a sidewalk on the other side of the street. There's a bunch of huge trees that we would have to take out to place a sidewalk. Why would we get rid of all those beautiful trees in lieu of a sidewalk when there's one across the street? So, it takes some, kind of evaluating the impacts of placement of a sidewalk, because, You might think that a sidewalk, you can just throw it in the ground and it can make turns and it can be different slopes, but ADA doesn't allow a lot of flexibility on slopes. It doesn't allow a lot of flexibility on ramps or anything. So there's a lot of things that get removed in place of a sidewalk that have to be taken into consideration. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think you asked was, is there like an ordinance that forces us to place a sidewalk along every street? Or more or less, is that kind of what you're asking? So I think our subdivision ordinances do require that developers place pedestrian infrastructure. Now, as far as the only plan we really have in place was what was created by the Walkable Bikeable Committee back in 2017, where they looked at sidewalk gaps, they looked at places where trails or sidewalks would logically make sense. And we've been picking that plan apart as we do street projects. We've been pulling the sidewalk recommendations from that plan, the trail recommendations from that plan, and bringing them into our capital improvement projects. They had a tiered priority list that expand over 25 years. We've been kind of taking that, it makes sense to do it at the time of a project, right? So we've been pulling that plan, whether it's 25 years down the road where they had that priority, we pulled it in and just said, let's do it right now, because this street's not going to get redone for another 40 years, right? So we do have that plan in place, and that's really what we've been working off of.
Excellent, thank you.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Finance Director Hellman, do you want to discuss your concern?
So I'm looking at which would now be section 1 of this if everything goes through. And I noticed that there's a date no later than August 15th that the deferment shall be subject to renewal each following year upon the filing of similar application not later than August 15th. I think that August 15th should be moved back to possibly November 15th or October 15th, since the new assessments for new projects aren't adopted by council until October 15th. And also then it goes in further to give the language of the deferment, where if we look at the information above, it says that just when I look it out, I think there's some issues with state statute. We have one that is on my desk right now that is filing for deferment, who is a disabled veteran. And we do believe that state statute allows deferment for veterans as well. And so I think that by having the language in there, instead of saying that it has to be an application and that the hardship shall be defined by resolution by city council, would maybe be more appropriate language.
I think that's a good idea.
We list them out there, and then we list them out in a resolution, and then, I'm just thinking, what's the purpose of having it in the charter, where if we can adjust it for state law for things like disabled veterans or something like that as well.
Does everybody understand that? Would our motion have to, if we wanted to change that, and just recommendations as presented by Mr. Sandy, perhaps, and then get specific, or would you want to look at that and bring that back at another time, perhaps?
I think you should look at that deferment section
Okay.
in detail.
Yep, Mr. Chair, I think this would be better to be brought back so you can see the actual language before you make a recommendation to the city council.
Right.
So I think this was great discussion, and I'm really glad we're doing this when Paul Sandy is still here, so.
I got one more thing.
Yep.
Does it make sense to keep this in the streets section? Because if you guys move forward with this changes, the street section is gone except for deferment of assessments. Does that belong in finance? Or does chapter 5 stay here and say streets and say deferment of assessments, and that's it? Because, really it is a financial issue. In all realities, chapter 5, if you guys accept these changes, could just go away in its entirety. And that could be moved to finances, the finance section of the charter.
You can make a new section, just call it deferments,
Yeah,
whatever. Well, we'll just have that come back then?
yeah.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that? And we don't need a motion for that?
Yes.
Yes.
Anybody have any more questions on the whole street sidewalk? I think primarily Mr. Sandy outlined in his memo. I think you did a really good job on that. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
A lot of it had to do with Chuck. We had a meeting too, so
Well, thank
give
you,
credit to
Chuck.
Chuck.
I thought I noticed his,
Yeah, sorry. And we had a very good conversation, and I feel like there's a lot to discuss, obviously, when it comes to streets. And we're a very different city with very different infrastructure than we were when this charter was first adopted. Yeah, the biggest infrastructure the city would have had back when we put this together would have been sidewalks. It wasn't paved streets, it wasn't, all the stuff we do with today. So, yeah, I'm fully concurrent with the changes that were proposed, and I think it's the best way for us to have the flexibility to deal with this going forward.
Mr. Chair,
yes, Mr. Shipe.
may I ask a question to Mr. Marone?
Oh, by all means, yeah.
Oh,
If you want to answer it.
So I like everything Paul did. I guess the thing that's not sitting well with me is the charter is kind of a reflection of our values as a city, and everything we're getting rid of makes sense to get rid of, but now we're left without anything that describes the value of sidewalks and how important they are for everyone to be able to use. And I think that's the only thing that's not sitting well with me. So it's nice to hear you and Paul chatted, but I'd be curious your thoughts on, is there a way we should document the value of a sidewalk and that it should be maintained, or is that a city ordinance?
yeah. I agree with you. I will say statutory cities don't have any language like that either. And so it's not like we're giving up something that other cities may be asserting. You also, I think, to me, there's got to be a recognition that the way we address sidewalks right now has actually created kind of a negative feedback loop where property owners are encouraged to not want sidewalks because they become this burden to them and all that. And so by taking this out, I actually think we do something really functionally positive for walking, for biking, for sidewalks use in itself. But yeah, it doesn't, if it were me and it were just me, I would want some additional, like, here's how we value sidewalks and here's where they should be and here's how we should be thinking about this. I would also have some information about how we were financing these things. I'm not a big fan of assessments for maintenance, for example. It's a bunch of those issues. But in terms of the charter, making this change gives us a lot of flexibility to have those conversations and a neighborhood by neighborhood, case by case basis in a way that I actually think will be better for sidewalks, better for walking, better for neighborhoods. We would have a difficult time having a charter that could be applied to Buffalo Hills and North Brainerd, to Northeast and Wise Road. And for that reason, I think this makes the most sense.
And I think, Mr. Shipe, if I
Go
may,
ahead,
that's,
Paul.
that definitely is more of a policy type issue. You know, it's, the charter is a legal document that doesn't really, doesn't speak to values, for example. I think policies do that, or plans, plans, here's how we think of sidewalks, here's the benefit of them. It goes through, like, we have a tree policy, we have, that kind of stuff. And so that, I think, is likely a policy type issue that
Well,
would
you're
be-
essentially, when you have that language, and you're talking ideological views in a charter, and it's not
Yeah.
appropriate, so that's what you're saying.
Yes,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I guess, and I'll ask Chuck too, I think our comp plan would cover those, or cover the values of the city. That should be able to help a lot of that. Wouldn't you think? Yeah, okay.
Well, moving on with our agenda item here, we have recommendations from Mr. Sandy. We have talked about deferments that we agreed will be coming back at a later date. And if we want to move forward with this or not, I guess now is our time to take action on that or do nothing. So,
And Mr. Chair?
Yep.
And staff's recommendation would be, this has been a great discussion, and we've gotten a lot of feedback. And I think what we'll do is go back and take a look at some of the issues that Connie has raised,
Right.
and then come back in May with a revised redlined version for you to consider in its entirety.
okay, so we won't we'll just ask for that then.
So move, Jaeger.
Second, Lambert.
Second by Lambert. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all is in favor.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Our next item is commissioner comments. Is there anybody who wants to say anything who hasn't said anything yet?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Just since our last meeting, the only thing that has stood out, again, back to the evergreen topic of allocating money to local organizations, I was a little disappointed in one of the city council meetings to see that there was some kind of closed door meetings with some of the groups that would be applying for these funds, where some groups were invited, some weren't. So I might be interested in kind of clarifying that language in the future, that this should be an open and transparent process for organizations interested in applying for this money. So it's just something on my mind.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chair, the only thing I want to say is thank you, Paul Sandy. Traitor, but thank you very much. And good luck in everything you do.
I wanted to say, I watched the last meeting you guys had and talking about the Evergreen. I was so impressed at all the imaginative ways you thought of trying to come back and get money for the Evergreen Summit. I was very proud of you guys. I mean, I was thinking of some of these going, wow, I never thought of that one. Man, that was creative. Anyway, Paul, thank you too. Appreciate it. And anybody want to go to the next item here?
I'll make a motion to adjourn, sir.
Motion by Lambert,
Second, Shape?
second by Shipe. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, we are adjourned. Thank you. Can I get a right from you?
Yes.